Airlines Confidential with Scott McCartney is made possible with support from RTX, Collins Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney, and Raytheon. Connecting and protecting our world. RTX.com. Infinity Flight, the leader in Cadet Academy flight training programs. InfinityFlight.com. Ontario International Airport in Southern California. SoCal So Easy. FlyOntario.com. The Executive MBA in Aviation at the University of Colorado, Denver. business.ucdenver.edu. And by Cirium, the world's most trusted source of aviation analytics, Cirium.com. We also welcome your business's support. Contact us at airlinesconfidential.com.
Welcome to Airlines Confidential. I'm Scott McCartney, and I just have to say right up front, I am very excited to bring you our interview with Glen Hauenstein, recently retired president of Delta Airlines. Glen led so much transformation in the airline industry, and I think you will all be captivated by his storytelling and his logic. I learned a lot from talking with him this time. I have always learned a lot talking with Glen over the years. And I think you did too, Henry Harteveldt. Welcome back. You and Glen worked at Continental at the same time way back, and you and Glen had a terrific conversation that we are really excited to bring to listeners. It's a special episode of the podcast, so here we go. Hi, Henry.
Well, hello, Scott. And yes, you're right. This is, of all the interviews I've had the opportunity and privilege to participate in, this definitely is one of the very best, because Glen really did share an awful lot about how he got started in this industry, what his career was like, his experience at Delta, and more. And yeah, Glen was in, I'm not sure if it was scheduling or network planning at the time, because I don't know if Continental was sophisticated enough to actually have network planning when we were there. But we did work together on certain things, such as the Cleveland Hub, as well as some other projects. And obviously, Glen has had a phenomenal career. And so I think our listeners are really, really going to enjoy the interview.
Yeah, in for a treat. All right. Before we turn to Glen, let's run through a bit of news, because one item in particular is really important. Some listeners may have heard that Southwest Airlines had a shakeup in senior management, sort of, and some may not have heard about it at all because Southwest was rather quiet about it. Nevertheless, I think it's very important for that company. The public story isn't really the news, but here's the public story. Justin Jones, an extremely talented young leader who we've had on the podcast, got promoted from Executive Vice President for Operations to Chief Commercial Officer. We had Justin on the podcast a year ago, and listeners heard just how sharp and thoughtful he is. Justin will have network planning, capacity planning, revenue management, pricing, Southwest business, and airport affairs. He'll report directly to CEO Bob Jordan. Justin is well qualified and deserving. He came up through revenue management and pricing, so this isn't new to him. And he has done a tremendous job worthy of promotion. In addition, Tony Roach, who is Chief Customer and Brand Officer, takes on some added responsibility, such as the People Department reporting to him. And that's a big deal at Southwest Airlines. Tony will report directly to CEO Bob Jordan as well. Tony is also a terrific, talented, up-and-coming leader, about the same age as Justin, in their late 40s. All of this sounds pretty routine, right? You've got really talented young executives, so let's promote them. Great. Except there's nothing routine about this. You can tell something's up, I think, because Southwest bends over backwards with its press release to make this seem like a good thing. Bob Jordan's quote, "These changes position us to move forward with greater clarity, stronger execution, and deeper connection across our company." That sounds like the perfect example of empty corporate speak. Even better, Southwest's announcement says, somewhat redundantly, "These changes reinforce clear accountability and alignment across critical parts of the business." Don't forget, it was just a couple of years ago when the refrain from Bob Jordan was that Southwest needed greater clarity, stronger execution, and more accountability. So it was putting operations and commercial together under Andrew Watterson. As it recovered from the Christmas 2022 meltdown, Southwest noted one significant change for the better was putting network planning and network operations in the same organization. And now 3 years later, Southwest has split that up because it was working really well. So not sure why it was split up, but maybe it needed to happen. Maybe this is really better for Southwest in the long run. Maybe it's great to be shaking things up just when you get things going well, because standing on laurels is what got Southwest in trouble before, right? But the recent Southwest announcement keeps trying to reassure us, even though we really shouldn't need reassurance. In case we were wondering, the announcement adds to its corporate speak that, quote, Southwest core values and commitment to its people remain unchanged. Who would have thought this was a change in core values to begin with? When a company tells you this isn't a change in core values, something big has changed. At least that's my experience. So what is the big change? Multiple changes, really. First, this most likely means Bob Jordan has decided he likes being CEO and he's going to stay on longer. Bob turned 65 last year. When he took the job from Gary Kelly in February 2022, he was seen as a transitional figure to the next generation, Andrew Watterson. Andrew, who podcast listeners have heard several times here, had been chief commercial officer and was asked to take over operations as well right before the 2022 Christmas operational meltdown. He had to clean all that up. And by the way, he was the one who had to testify before an angry Congress, not Bob Jordan. He's done an amazing job. Southwest has excelled operationally, back to industry-leading reliability, and it has excelled commercially. The money is pouring in. A lot of changes were forced by activist investor Elliott Management, and Elliott pushed Southwest to make changes faster than the company planned. Andrew was the one who got that done. Bob Jordan's handled the big picture stuff. Andrew, along with his team of Justin Jones and Tony Roach and Adam DeCare, who, by the way, wasn't mentioned in this, they are the ones who executed. In the first quarter this year, Southwest had the second highest operating margin among big U.S. airlines, better than Delta's. The stock is up. On time is up, cancellations are down, Elliott is largely out. It still owns about 9% of Southwest shares, but has given up two very important seats on Southwest board, and things are really going well there. Andrew is the one who really made that happen. He has proven to be an incredibly effective airline leader. So it seemed like the next logical step was for Bob to retire. He can declare he saved the company from money-grubbing outside agitators, quite rightfully declare that, and turn it over to Andrew. Except these moves strip Andrew of responsibility for the commercial side of the company and leave him only operations. I think the message from Bob is, I'm staying, likely until Justin or Tony is ready to run the company. And Andrew isn't going to be CEO of Southwest. Did Bob come to this on his own? I don't want to sell Bob Jordan short, but there is boardroom intrigue here that has affected this. The major manipulator at Southwest right now is Rakesh Gangwal, the former U.S. Airways veteran and co-founder of Indigo, a startup that became India's largest airline and turned Rakesh Gangwal into a billionaire. Rakesh was chairman of the board at Southwest after Gary Kelly was pushed out by Elliott Management. But he stepped down from the chairman's role for personal reasons. He remains on the board and remains a very significant voice inside Southwest. He's become Bob Jordan's trusted voice in his ear, from what I understand. Current board chairman Doug Brooks waxes poetically about all he has learned from Rakesh. No doubt, Rakesh is a really smart, really good airline operator who has brought a lot to Southwest. But several senior executives who got crosswise with him or delivered analysis he didn't agree with were pushed out or forced into retirement. And you can see Rakesh's cost-cutting DNA and, frankly, disregard for Southwest employees in several actions, most notably layoffs. After going through a major round of layoffs in 2025, Southwest laid off another 75 people last month, despite reporting record revenue. Why is that a concern? One big advantage Southwest has over rivals is its hardworking, caring culture. Its people, that's the real legacy of Herb and Colleen. Culture seems to be less and less a priority at the new Southwest. I think Southwest core values really have changed, despite the company's statement in the press release. My suspicion is that Rakesh Gangwal wants to be seen as the genius behind the Southwest turnaround, and he's effectively minimizing and pushing out people who did the hard work to make that turnaround happen. That's very cynical on my part, I know, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope this isn't about ego. Anyway, Henry, that's how it looks to me. And by the way, if Andrew Watterson isn't going to be CEO of Southwest, another airline should grab him. And I think some of his team would come with him. Andrew has all the qualities I've seen in great CEOs in this business. Admittedly, Henry, this is all very foggy. Maybe when the sun comes out, things will look very different. And this is all much ado about nothing. I hope so, but I don't think so.
Well, Scott, I lived in San Francisco for 35 years. I'm used to fog.
Yeah. Well, then you can cut through it.
Yeah, and like the song goes, the sun will come out tomorrow. But I agree with you on all of this. Look, I take nothing away from either Justin, who I've met, or Tony Roach for their promotions. They've worked hard. They deserve to be promoted. That work deserves to be acknowledged.
And they are both really talented.
Right.
No doubt about that.
No question. And look, they helped Andrew right the ship that is Southwest.
Yes, no question.
But I want to go back to something that you said earlier, which is these changes position us to move forward with greater clarity, stronger execution, and deeper connection. I would argue that the airline is already moving forward very, very, very well. You pointed out that Southwest financial performance in the first calendar quarter of this year exceeded that of Delta's, which has always been one of the standard setters for financial performance in this industry, at least in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And the saying is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Doesn't mean that you can't take a look at shifting some responsibilities. If anything, if I were at Southwest, if I were on the board, I certainly would be pushing Bob, not necessarily to retire, but to say, okay, let's start making sure Andrew has the skills he needs and the time he needs and the attention span he needs to focus on the areas that he will need as CEO. If there are any gaps in his background, and I suspect they are very, very few. So giving some responsibility to some others is fine, but I would have those folks continue to report to Andrew because it's obviously working very, very well together. And you made the point about how network planning and network operations were part of the same organization and were working well.
Yeah.
And I think that's critically important for Southwest, given its complex route network structure. They have fewer point-to-point flights than they have had in the past. They are more of a hub and spoke airline than they were in the past, but they still have a more complex domestic route network structure and therefore operation in many ways compared to its key competitors in the U.S.
Yeah, that's a great point about the complexity. Yes.
Right. So I wouldn't mess with that. I also agree with you on your observation about ego. Look, business leaders have ego. That's no secret, and it's not a sin. But it's when their ego gets the better of them, and it's when the ego is dictating things where businesses at least start to get into trouble. I've worked at companies where ego dominated. It's not good. It's honestly not. I have seen as an analyst where ego rules, and it's generally not good. So it is very concerning to me. And then let's bring in the recent announcement this week about Southwest having long-haul route ambitions. Southwest said at the Bernstein conference earlier this past week that they have identified 8 to 12 international destinations, I believe all in Europe, that they would like to start serving at some point in the next few years. And that's a big statement.
Yeah.
Look, Scott, I remember when Southwest was a very small airline using a couple of gates at Love Field going to places that were no more exotic than Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. I remember when Southwest got permission to fly interstate from Love Field to New Orleans, because I was in college then. And we get back to visit my grandparents and my family in Dallas for less money. And, Southwest has morphed into a very different kind of company. And it's a much more profitable, much more successful airline than it was even a year ago, let alone 5, 10 more years ago than that. That's not when or why you need to make these executive changes. And your point about Mr. Gangwal potentially being concerned about somebody hogging the spotlight that he feels he deserves to himself, it is an important one. And it's a very concerning one. And investors should definitely be concerned about this. And frankly, other members of Southwest's board should be concerned about this.
Yeah.
Because if Mr. Gangwal is behaving in ways that could prove to be counterproductive to Southwest, that benefits no one. So, I hope it won't be as bad as it could be. I also agree with you that, I know Andrew is an extremely loyal person to Southwest, but if a recruiter calls with a tempting opportunity for Andrew, I hope he takes the call and has the conversations. And Southwest should be very, very worried. Losing Andrew could be one of the greatest business losses for the airline in recent years.
Yeah, especially if he takes a couple of people who I think are very loyal to him with him.
Right.
And if the succession plan was for Andrew to ultimately become CEO, I think you could do this. You could find more responsibility for Justin and for Tony and for others by naming Andrew president, a title that Mike Vandeman had when he was running operations, but then Bob Jordan took when Mike Vandeman was pushed out.
Right.
That's there. And if Andrew was the guy, you could certainly do this. I think taking a lot of responsibility away from Andrew says Andrew's not going to be the guy.
Right. And Scott, you mentioned Southwest culture. I mean, this is a company that put corporate culture on the map before many companies even thought about it.
Yeah.
The books have been written about this. Business school case studies have been created around this. And I'm sure you're asked about this a lot by others. I know I am. And we know corporate culture matters more to many organizations now than it did decades ago. But, I'm sure, again, as you do, I hear from Southwest management and line workers, and they do tell me that the culture is changing. They feel in some ways maybe there are a few improvements, but mostly they're concerned that there's a lot less respect, that there's a lot less care for culture overall. And I think this is felt more in the management group and at the headquarters, where culture is really fostered. I mean, just because you have a beer bash on Friday afternoons doesn't mean you've got great corporate culture. Now, there are a lot of people at Southwest who are very, very, very dedicated to continuing the culture that was created and crafted by Herb Kelleher and Colleen Barrett, and that has sustained the airline so well. I think they are trying to fight the good fight. I hope they are victorious in that effort. But I really do agree that as Southwest has morphed into being just another airline with extra legroom seats and assigned seating and checked bags and talk about airport lounges and even premium cabin and now long haul flying, all of which sound great to me. The loss of the focus on corporate culture, I think, is one of the things that really helps keep Southwest. Delta has a very strong corporate culture. They talk about it as being core to the Delta difference. And we'll hear about this in the discussion with Glenn that's coming up. I just hope that they don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yeah, no, and a lot of Delta's employee cooperation comes from excellent profit sharing that they have, right? Yeah. And Southwest, I mean, the culture, it was so interesting to me with all the changes. It was interesting the cooperation that Andrew and Justin got from employees as they made changes and then changes to those changes, right? Getting on the airplane, there was an issue with overhead bins in the front of the airplane. You had A-list preferred customers getting there, and the bins would be full because people getting on the pre-boarders and others before them, they'd stuff their bags in the bins over rows 2, 3, 4, 5. And so Southwest positioned flight attendants there. They kept the bins closed until A-list preferred started getting on. They created a new boarding category for A-list preferred. All of these changes almost in real time. And so, okay, we didn't get it right the first time. We're gonna tweak it. But there were the flight attendants taking on new responsibilities. Policing the bins, and it was extremely helpful and all. And I was really struck at how at other airlines that would have been a whole union battle. Wait a minute, you ask us to do something else, something different, something more. What do we get in return? All that. Right. The Southwest employees really stepped up to make all this work. The gate agents, the flight attendants, the baggage handlers, everybody. Right. And that's really significant. But if you're going to start having, regular layoffs and stuff, it's really going to change the culture. One other little example, we saw recently, American and somebody else said, hey, we're gonna button up the cabin at 18,000 feet on descent because of injuries from turbulence to flight attendants. Well, Southwest did that a year ago. And that was largely Andrew, I believe, who said, hey, we're having some injuries and why not just have them sit down earlier so that flight attendants aren't getting injured. And that was a very employee friendly, move and I think has worked just fine, but a year ahead of other airlines. And so I think executives there still is a team spirit there. It's not what it was when Herb and Colleen had it. It's not going to be what it was when you have so much turnover after the pandemic and such a big workforce spread far and wide. But it's working right now. And I think not treating employees with respect and care has gotten a lot of airlines in trouble. So we'll see.
Yeah. You mentioned the overhead bin issue. I think part of the changes were that Southwest flight attendants were, or at least some, were putting their carry-on luggage in those forward overhead bins.
Right.
And when Southwest brought it to their attention that, okay, look, the world has changed. We now have this product we're selling. People pay us more money for it, either, buying the fare that includes the seat, or they spend more money flying us and they get that as status or whatever. Would you please put your bags elsewhere? And while there may have been a little bit of back and forth on exactly where they go, the flight attendants agreed and they did it. And they understood that making the change mattered to keeping their new premium customers happy and delivering a product that these people literally were paying for. So again, you get that through culture, you get that through collaboration. And remember, Southwest flight attendants are unionized. Yeah. So it's, something like this may have taken a little bit of discussion with union reps as well as, the flight attendant workforce representatives and so on. But they did it. And that's again, something I hope never, ever stops at Southwest. But as you said, if the flight attendants, or for that matter, any work group isn't shown respect that they feel they deserve, it's not going to continue. We just know it.
Yeah. All right. So you were in New York at an interesting conference. Anything out of that?
Oh, yeah. I was in New York this past week at the Caribbean Tourism Organization's annual Caribbean Week marketing conference. And there were representatives from nearly all of the 24 or so countries and destinations that are members of the Caribbean Tourism Organization. They asked me to speak about the challenges with airlines and what the region needs to do to keep the air service they have and get more. And that's, of course, a common refrain. And the network planners at airlines, I'm sure, hear this all the time, of course, as well. I was able to speak with executives in network planning or chief commercial officers or in marketing departments at 8 airlines. All of them said, look, I'm happy to talk to you, but it's got to be off the record. And you can't tell anyone which airline we spoke to, and I agreed to that. But they talked very candidly about the importance of the Caribbean. What you have to understand is tourism. It can account for sometimes 60% or more of some of these countries or destinations' GDP. And airlift is literally how some of these places survive. It's not only how the tourists arrive, but it's the food and parts for their computers and clothes and many other things. Now, obviously, there are ships that bring some of this to them, but a lot of goods do come in on air. And so air service really is paramount. And what impressed me, by the way, in talking with these network planners was, they're keenly aware of what's going on with resort development and everything else, infrastructure at these countries. And what I heard from airlines is that revenue matters more than cost. It's not that cost isn't important, but revenue matters more. Tourism taxes can kill demand. And there were multiple airlines who had very harsh words for Barbados in particular. And, while certainly the strategic importance of the Caribbean varies airline to airline, no airline I spoke with said, "Oh, it's an unimportant place to us. It's just the importance will vary." But what impressed me, I spoke with their ministers, government ministers at this event, and all of them are very attuned to this. All of them want to have productive relationships with airlines. All of them are keenly aware that airlines will fly to their countries or their destinations so long as it's profitable. And they are eager to be partners with airlines. They want to understand this. And several ministers, by the way, said they're trying to mediate battles within their markets between airport authorities, which know they need to build new terminals and want something very grand and very expensive, and keeping the costs down while having some semblance of aesthetic appeal and so on, because they know airlines aren't going to pay a lot of money. And they know that airlines will pull out of the market if the airport costs soar. So, for anyone listening, if the Caribbean is part of your network, I would encourage you get involved with the Caribbean Tourism Organization. They're super nice people. Attend next year's Caribbean marketing event. It's a great way to meet people in an informal setting. It's a small group, and you can have I'm sure, very productive conversations. And it's enjoyable. And while it wasn't held the night we were there, one of their events is some kind of rum and fun thing. And the more rum, the more fun.
All right, great report. Speaking of fun, let's thank our sponsors. Thanks first to the Executive MBA in Aviation at the University of Colorado, Denver. The Executive MBA in Aviation at CU Denver is the first degree of its kind in the world, taught by industry experts and designed for ambitious leaders from across the aviation ecosystem. It's also lots of fun. With classes located at Denver International Airport and week-long residencies in Washington, D.C., and at airports around the world, students experience a hybrid, flexible course structure that balances in-person and online classes without career interruption. Go to business.ucdenver.edu to learn more. Thanks as well to RTX for its longtime sponsorship of Airlines Confidential. RTX rallies more than 180,000 innovators around a powerful vision to create a safer, more connected world. With industry-leading tools and technology, the RTX Global team works across market-leading businesses, Collins Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney, and Raytheon to drive progress for generations to come. Together, RTX pushes the boundaries of known science and finds new ways to connect and protect our world. Visit rtx.com to learn more.
We all know that being an airline pilot can be a lot of fun, certainly a challenge, but a lot of fun.
Yes, but without the rum.
Without the rum, at least between 8 to 10 hours or whatever. But
right, 8 hours bottle to throttle.
Right, but the good folks at Infinity Flight Academy, longtime sponsors as well, offer potential airline pilots a path to the flight deck that starts long before they reach the airline. At Infinity Flight Academy, they are very proud to serve as a flight training partner for the American Airlines Cadet Academy, helping prepare the next generation of professional airline pilots. Infinity Flight Academy's training is structured, standardized, and built around the discipline today's airlines expect from day one. For future pilots pursuing a career at the highest level, Infinity Flight Academy is proud to be a part of that journey. Infinity Flight Academy, training tomorrow's airline pilots through the American Airlines Cadet Academy. All right, Scott, it's time to move to our discussion with Glen Hauenstein.
Glen Hauenstein retired as president of Delta Airlines at the end of February, following a storied career. Glen excelled at network planning and strategy, pricing and premium strategy, moving Delta to the top of the U.S. airline industry. I don't think any of us can overestimate Glen's impact on Delta and on air travel today. He changed how airlines market and sell products and how powerful networks are designed. He never had a high public profile, but he had enormous impact. Glen is truly one of the smartest and most committed airline executives I've ever had the pleasure to watch and learn from. Prior to joining Delta, his roles included Vice General Director for Alitalia and Senior Vice President for Continental Airlines, where he and Henry worked together. Glen started his career at People Express. He's a graduate of Stetson University in DeLand, Florida. Glen continues to serve as a strategic advisor to Delta, and he recently joined the board of directors of Delta's partner, WestJet. It is a tremendous delight to have him with us on Airlines Confidential. Welcome, Glen.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, and thank you, Henry. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, but I've really been looking forward to this interview, and I can't wait to get started. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Scott. And by the way, that intro was fantastic. I'm gonna frame that and put it up in my office.
Oh, you earned it. You earned it. All right. Well, Glen, we always start with what we now affectionately call the Baldanza question, because Ben taught me that it was a good first question since people have such interesting paths into the airline business. So the question is, how'd you get into this crazy business? And I'm really eager to hear the answer because I know you started as a flight attendant, right, in Newark with People Express?
Well, I've got a story to tell you. So, you have to go back in Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine to 1982. And I had just graduated college with my degree in business. And of course, it was a recessionary environment and difficult to find a job. So I wound up moving back to my hometown in New Jersey and started looking for a job and eventually found one. And it was a job at a company called Biederman Industries Financial Services, and they did import financing for fashion labels. And my job was to make sure that the fashion garments that were manufactured in Asia were not paid for until they left the shelf in the retailer, and keeping track of all of the inventory throughout its life cycle. And I got to tell you, it was the most boring job in the world. It was before computers, and we used to have to do this all on little paper strips that we would put in these racks. And and the office had no windows, and I was living with my parents, and I thought my life is over. I had joined a bowling league on Wednesdays, and our team was called Money to Spare because we were the finance department. We thought that was so clever. And so I'm 21 years old, and I'm working in Secaucus, New Jersey, living with my parents, thinking, oh gosh, why did I go to school? What did I do? And I would look through the paper, remember classified ads in paper before the internet. Sure. And there was this advertisement in the Bergen Evening Record, and the job was customer service manager for this new upstart airline called People Express Airlines. And I had heard a little bit about them. I knew they were based in Newark. But like then, as it is at Delta, we accept one out of probably 100 people. And it was the same way at People Express in the beginning. There were hundreds of applicants literally for every job that they had. And I started the application process thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to get out of this office. I've got to see the world. I just want to not be in an office sitting all day. And I got the call, and I went through 3 or 4 interviews, including a group interview where they had everybody sit in a circle and interact with each other while they were observing from an outside ring. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And, right before Christmas of 1982, I got the call I was accepted, and I could start, I think it was December 12th of 1982.
Wow.
That was my beginning. And
That's crazy.
It was a great learning experience for me because the role of customer service manager at People Express, and Henry will know this because he was there for a while as well, was you did everything. You marshaled in the airplanes, you checked in customers, you did the res lines, and eventually you flew on the airplanes. And so that was one of my favorite jobs ever, was being able to be a flight attendant on an airplane. And I thought it was the most fun job ever. But it wears you out. I don't know. It's a very physical job. At least it was back then.
Yeah, I wasn't at People Express, Glenn, but I was at Continental when we were going through the merger process, and I spent a lot of time with the People Express team. And I have to tell you, one, there were a bunch of really smart and really nice people there, but I was very impressed with that whole the customer service manager approach. What it did in terms of helping employees understand so much of the operation and how to serve customers, and the different responsibilities and what it takes to run an airline. And I thought that was really, really novel.
I know a lot of people listen to these podcasts, and I would suggest to you that over my many years in this business, one of the things that I think has served me so well is having done all those jobs and knowing what's possible and not what's possible, and not just believing what people say is possible or not possible. So, yeah, I think that period of my life really has served me incredibly well in understanding how airlines work. And I would encourage managers at all the airlines that listen to this to take the younger people and ensure that they have the high potential people, and ensure that they are cross-utilized and get a real broad view of what the airline actually does before they start making decisions about how to maximize it.
Glenn, you have done so much. I mean, we talked about People Express, where you got almost baptism by fire, as the customer service manager. Then you go to Continental, Alitalia, Delta, all your work throughout. As you look back on what is a very rich history of experience, I'm curious what you see as your biggest accomplishment, and what you found to be the toughest challenge you faced in your career.
I think they're probably two in the same. Is that I think from the time I worked at Continental through my early years at Delta, the airline legacy carriers, what historically have been known as the legacies, prior to that, and I think once again considered the majors now, we didn't have an answer for low cost or low fare airlines. And so I think the biggest problem that we faced was that we were getting killed by upstarts, we used to call them Jet Orange or Jet Green. They seem to be popping out of nowhere with easy access to capital and explosive growth into our markets, or I wouldn't say our markets, but the big markets in the United States. And I think a lot of people and a lot of smart people tried to figure out a solution to this. And I'm not claiming that we figured it out, because you never figure out the airline business. It's always changing. But I think we changed the way tickets are purchased and really re-engineered loyalty programs and actually the value proposition to give people more choices and to really value what they want in their air travel. And before that, I think, there was a period of time where the only way that was being sold to airline management by consultants, external consultants, was the only thing that mattered was cost. And I can't remember how many meetings I was in with, the people at McKinsey or the people at Bain, telling this is the only way you're going to survive. And that created offshoots like Song at Delta, or, TED at United, or Continental Light at Continental, that we were trying to send out rescue boats that could have a lower cost structure, that could eventually overtake the legacy airline. And when you think about it, how did we miss the fact that we weren't getting paid for our most premium products. How did everybody miss that for so many years? And these are really bright people. These are people coming out of Harvard with the biggest MBAs, and how did you overlook that? I think I was always indoctrinated into the 65% of the travel decision is made on schedule and price alone, which is absolutely true, which leaves another 35% of travelers who are selecting on all other product attributes. And nobody was catering to those 35%. Everybody was focused on the schedule and price. And that left, I think, a wide opening for Delta to start what we initially called decommoditization. We had evolved that many times, and I think now we call it the premium product strategy. But originally it was more of a defensive move to say, how can we stop losing? And, I think we did a great job at Delta, turning everything upside down and saying, wow, instead of having first class domestically be a loss leader, now it's the giant profit center. And that enables a whole transformation, not only of Delta, but of the carriers that followed us. And I think it's really redefined how airlines work.
Glenn, if I may, just a follow up on that. I mean, you mentioned, decommoditization, but part of that was the way Delta chose to price first class, not just the product and the experience, but the way you priced it. And I remember being in discussions with pricing people at TWA, at Continental, about first class, and we needed to adjust the pricing so it was, a lot more affordable for somebody to trade up from coach to first on a domestic flight. And we were at Continental at the same time when we introduced what we called the Y upgrade fare, which is an economy fare that confirmed you in first to comply with corporate booking tools. Of course, this is a long time ago, before the internet, when corporate travel departments and travel management companies ruled the roost. But it wasn't until Delta said, let's price first in a different way, that we saw a lot of movement into paying for it, because people just couldn't afford to or wouldn't pay it. And then there was also basic economy, which Delta introduced, where you decontented, as the phrase goes, the coach fare to match the budget airlines, but not just with travel restrictions, but with experiential limits. And those were, lightning bolt type of moments. And I'm just wondering if maybe you can share a little bit about it. I was there with you at Delta for basic economy, but share a little bit about the challenges, the discussions that went into these that perhaps people aren't aware of.
Right. Well, there's a gentleman who is still an officer at Delta named Eric Phillips, and I call him Eric affectionately. I call him the father of domestic first class, because when we sat down and we looked at what was first class doing, we had a 92% sat load factor, and I'm going to ask you, what do you think the paid load factor was?
Less than 30%?
It was 13%. 13% is paid. Now take out of that, half of that, over 6% of that was domestic portion of international journeys. So people who were buying business class overseas and got it to sit in domestic first. So actually we were selling 6%. 6% was being sold as domestic first. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure, and oh, by the way, let me just add that the domestic average realized fare was 11x. So if the coach fare was 200, the first class equivalent was 2,200.
Right.
And, we had effectively priced our way out of that. And on the frequent flyer side, the way you got into first class was you flew a lot of miles on low fares, and then you entered what I called the great lottery, the great airline lottery, which is you put yourself on the list and see if you win. And so people just weren't paying for it. They didn't see value in it. And we were rewarding the wrong behaviors. We were rewarding people who bought low fares, if you think about it. If you could buy or find a $99 transcon fare and collect 2,600 miles, that was the highest return, right? And that was a loss leader on both sides. Not only did we lose money on the ticket, we lost a lot of money on the frequent flyer redemptions. So, you had to re-engineer several components of that, including how frequent flyer miles are achieved. And that was moving it to a dollar based as opposed to a mileage based. And quite honestly, that took a lot of the cocktail, what I would call the cocktail chatter, out of the domestic lexicon. Because if you think about it, prior to changing the frequent flyer program, people would go to cocktail parties and they would brag about how little they paid for their ticket.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I flew to Florida and I only paid $79. Once you change that to a mileage, then people saw that as you're a cheapskate.
Yeah. But
right?
But that's the fundamental change, because before all this, it was just a commodity, everybody got to their destination at the same time. So why not pay the cheapest fare? And you change that, so it's no longer a commodity product. You're not selling bananas anymore.
Well, and I think that was the theory is, well, let's try and segment it as much as we can. And of course, the limits on segmentation were really the distribution systems, and they were also the internet and what you could. And I think, trying to come up with, what do we want this to look like? What do we want the average fare to look like, in terms of, now that we're displaying them all together as opposed to just one? Because if you remember Orbitz, Expedia, Travelocity, they used to all have the matrices, which were what we called the commoditizer, right? Is that
Right.
Every airline's logo would be there, and the fares, we would pick the lowest fare.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't know what product you were getting. And so, trying to make it so that we could actually describe the different products, that was really a daunting task. And bringing that to market, bringing it to the internet, getting travel agencies to understand what we were doing. And I credit Steve Sear and our sales team, because, as we brought in basic economy, they were able to convince the corporations that their customers didn't want this, which is true. They didn't want that product. So almost all of our corporate travelers then excluded that fare from being available. And if you think back, even further back in Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine,
I love that reference.
well, the way we tried to compete with the ultra low fare carriers was we would match their product and then try and inventory control it.
Yeah.
And what happened was we never were doing a great job at inventory managing it. So we had what I would call the barbell. So if brand X had a $9 fare, which was not uncommon at the time, and we matched a $9 fare, we'd almost universally take more of it than we wanted, run through all the inventory, and then wind up with some very expensive fares and let brand X have all the good stuff in the middle. So there were a lot of things we were trying to change. And I think, the segmentation was the piece of it. The other thing we did internally, which is not discussed very much, is we tried to understand competitors' cost structures and pricing. And so if we knew that the lowest cost person in the market was going to lose money on that fare, let them have it. And our entry point would be where they started to make money. So then we would have no inventory that they would be profitable on underneath that level. So a lot of things all coming together in a relatively short order of a couple of years. And I think it really flipped the industry upside down and allowed the major carriers to really compete much better than we had historically. And, you hate to see any airline go away and listen to the failure of Spirit. But the failure of Spirit wasn't last week or last month. It's been years in the making.
Yes.
And eventually they just ran a stroke of bad luck. But, that company didn't reinvent itself. And I think what's interesting is that we all have to reinvent ourselves. And I don't know what the next wave of reinvention is going to be. I'm sure you're going to ask me if I know.
Well, yes, yeah, but we'll get to that.
I know. I have some ideas of what it might be, but I don't think any of us know. And what's so exciting and what's so fun about this industry is that it's always changing, and it really does challenge your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of challenging your mind, I do want to get to this before we get to the other stuff. You work for some legendary CEOs along the way. Who challenged your mind the most? And And who do you think was the most impactful?
Well, I'm going to start in chronological order rather than in order of impact, because I think all of them had different impacts. And first, chronologically, you know, Henry, you were at Continental, and you were there during the period, I believe, where we had 10 CEOs in 10 years.
10 presidents like in 10 days. I mean, it was rotating. Frank
It was,
Lorenzo was, at the helm, but yeah.
yeah, it was also a period that I learned a lot because, you saw what worked and what didn't, because you essentially worked at 10 different companies with 10 different leaders in 10 years just staying at your same desk. So it was a very tumultuous period. But then when Gordon Bethune took over, and I think, what year was that?
94, 95?
94. I see. It's been so many years. Yeah.
Yeah.
He had this relentless focus on the customer, and it was a game changer for us. As before that, we had not focused on the people who were actually buying our product. We had focused on each other. We had focused on cost reductions. We had focused on revenue generation, but we hadn't focused on the customer. And he brought, I think, a relentless focus on value proposition for the customer, which I learned a lot from. And I'm going to tell you this quick story. We had 10 CEOs in 10 years, so you can imagine that the political infighting and the instability that brings inside a company, backstabbing, all the things in corporate culture that you don't want. And I remember soon after he was named CEO, being in his office and starting to complain about one of the other vice presidents who I didn't think was doing such a great job. And I'll never forget what he told me. And I think this is a great thing to pass on to other folks who work in the airline space. And he looked at me and he said, "Glenn, have you told this person how you feel about it?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I'll tell you what, you go tell them exactly what you told me. And if you're not satisfied, then come back and see me." And I thought there was such genius in that. And to this day, I'll still remember that conversation because it literally kiboshed your ability to backstab people.
Yeah.
If you have a problem with somebody, go see them. And if you still have a problem with them after you tell them what your problem is, then come see me.
Yeah.
It's just genius. So anyway, I have utmost respect, and I know Gordon's, I think, 83 or 84 now, and still in the same house in Houston, but I have such admiration for him. Then Richard Anderson, my gosh, this is a man who is so into the details and knew everything about the air and studied it. He studied it like it was a course. And his ability to bring these companies together and to turn them into an operational powerhouse, I've never seen anybody exactly wired like Richard, and I admire him so much. And I think it's really great that I can call all three of these CEOs still very good friends and mentors to me. These are people I learned so much from. And then, of course, Ed. And Ed, the thing I learned most from Ed is that everybody has to win. In a winning airline, everybody has to win. Every constituent has to win. And he's so masterful about assuring that whether it's the shareholders, whether it's the employees, whether or not it's the communities we serve, everybody has to win. And he's so good at that. And I hadn't seen that before, and really learned that from him. And he's also such a great friend. So yeah, had three really legendary CEOs, and life is a learning experience, and you get to keep learning from people. That's one of the greatest things about it.
Well said. Thank you.
Glenn, you've shared a lot about what's gone right. What's the biggest mistake you've seen airlines in general as an industry make over the years since you've joined the business?
Yeah, I think, you have to know who you are, and you have to know who your customers are and what they want from you. And I don't know this to be true or not true, but we'll see how it all plays out. The LCCs and the ULCCs are all now trying this rush to premium. And I think to myself, it's going to be very interesting to see how they do with that, because they don't have what people want in terms of club infrastructure, in terms of schedule density. They just don't have what premium customers are seeking. So the discounts that they'll have to offer on that are significantly higher than they might even in the coach product because it's so inferior in terms of the offering. And, I don't know how this will all play out, but I find this group think where everybody thinks that it's only cost or it's only premium or they don't seem to work out very well. And you really have to examine who you are and what you're trying to be in that marketplace and focus on that. And if you have a large enough customer base that wants those products and services, you're going to win. And when you just follow other people because you see them doing well without thinking it through, I think those are the big mistakes I've seen, whether or not it's just a singular focus on cost, whether or not it's a singular focus on revenue, whether or not it's a singular focus on premium. It's an amalgamation of all this and really understanding your customer better than your competitor.
So let's take that a little bit further. Where do you think the industry as a whole is headed? What excites you about the future? What scares you about what's ahead for airlines?
I think what's amazing is when you think about what we've done over the last 5 or 10 years is bringing more choices and, really customizing. There's a company that says customize your car insurance, but customizing what customers really value and want from us. And I think we're at the beginning stages of that. And I think AI will allow us to create new products and also fulfill new products that we don't have in market today. And I think, it's going to be a very different experience when you have an agent, your AI agent that can actually shop for you and find exactly what you want because it fits your needs.
Interesting.
As we look at the changes we're seeing with the industry and airlines' abilities to fine-tune their pricing, fine-tune their revenue management, fine-tune the way they market to and engage with customers. The good news is they are selling more seats on more flights throughout the year in all cabins. So thinking about airline loyalty programs, and I'll put loyalty in quotes because it's really become revenue recognition, does it make sense for airlines to still offer the free travel awards versus whether it's status perks, complimentary Wi-Fi, whatever else that might be? Because those award travel seats, even though there's some kind of revenue recognition in terms of converting miles into something for the airline internally, it's still taking a seat out of inventory for a paid cash customer. Do you think it's possible or even smart for airlines to say, nope, we're done with the free travel, we'll give you discounts on it, but no more totally free seats for loyalty awards?
I don't think that will ever happen. I think...
You think it should happen?
No, I don't think it should happen. I think, this is an industry that's created this, and
Right.
And it's become part of the core value proposition to our customers. Not that it won't continue to evolve, but I do think that forever that there will be a significant number of free seats. And I think when you think even about the long-term decisions that airlines are making today about buying larger airplanes with lower incremental seat costs, it plays back to the fact that we realize that we can sell the seats on the airplane because we have created these large infrastructures. And now it's about driving incremental costs out of them and incremental choice into them. And that's gonna continue down that path, I think, is going to be larger and larger planes. I really wish that Airbus would make the Dash 500 of the 220 series, and I wish they would make it an Airbus 322 because we could sell those incremental seats, and those would be the most profitable seats on the airplane. So I think when you look at what planes are selling in the marketplace by the likes of the big three or globally, it's usually the largest variant of everything. So the incremental cost of those incremental seats is actually quite low.
Thanks.
So bigger planes, I do want to ask you about about network planning and performance. When Delta merged with Northwest, it seemed like you had two big networks that were underperforming, and you took all that and you turned it into a powerhouse. So what is the key to network planning? Why does one network perform better than a rival network?
Well, I think it's all how every one of the big three carriers could say on paper they have the best network, and there would be valid points in every one of those papers. It's what you get out of it, and I think that's what's so interesting. If you look at what American is today versus what they were pre their mergers, if you look at what United was pre-merger versus what they are today, and you look at what Delta was pre-merger versus what it is today, I don't think you would see that any of them have changed their network as much as Delta did. And that's because when we put these carriers together, we had subscale hubs. And we had subscale hub in Memphis, and we had subscale hub in Cincinnati. And I used to have a question for our network training classes and really for our employees. Which has more revenue per day each way in it, the city of Cincinnati or JFK LA? And the answer was JFK LA at the time. I'm sure it probably is today still. But, you have to play where the big money is. And so while we had Atlanta, which is a great position, I would consider it to be the boardwalk of airline hubs. We had Detroit and Minneapolis, both larger cities, as the smaller hubs in the region. Cincinnati, Cleveland, all disappeared, so those were going to get relatively stronger. Salt Lake City, and a very, very robust and growing economy out there. But then we were still lacking. If you added up what the revenue potential was out of our hubs versus the revenue potential out of United's hubs or American's hubs, we were the light one. And so we had to go develop our positions. And so at the time, I think we were 4 or 5 in LA, and now we're number 1.
Yeah.
We're number 1 in Kennedy, we're number 1 in LaGuardia, we're number 1 in Boston. All those transpired, post-merger. And so, creating that so that you were not at a deficit because the cities you served didn't have a lower revenue potential was really one of the paramount things we had to achieve after the merger. And I think it's the demand for Delta's product is when we went in, we generally won. And so that was a really exciting period of time that we became the number 1 carrier in Los Angeles, the number 1 carrier in New York, or the number 1 carrier in Boston. And number 2 in Seattle.
Yeah.
But we try harder.
Well, yeah, and I think Austin is an interesting opportunity, and other places. But it was so interesting how you did it, because like in Los Angeles, you did it on the ground as well as in the air, right? You accelerated during the pandemic. You accelerated construction on the terminal and made it a really good ground facility. And I don't know. In New York, I thought it was insanity when you guys said you were going to do a hub at LaGuardia, the most delay-plagued airport in the world. But you made it work, and you not only made it work, you made it work with dependability. And selling dependability particularly to business travelers became a huge thing. So you captured, cities where the money is, and that was a big part of it too, right?
Yeah, like I said, I think Delta did more post-merger than any of the other carriers, and clearly they've all changed, they've all morphed. But I think if you look at our route network post-merger versus our route network today, or Delta's route network today, that it is the most changed of any of them.
So what do you think Delta needs to do to remain the industry leader, especially given United's investments and network moves and Scott Kirby's ambitions?
Well, I think United makes Delta better because I think competition in this space makes people more aggressive. You don't want to ever be complacent in this business. It's a business where you can easily be surpassed in a nanosecond. And so having somebody behind you challenging you makes you better. And I think, this is going to be a great race to watch. And now that I'm retired, I can watch it.
But Glenn, to that point, Delta has made some announcements and made some decisions recently that kind of undermine its product leadership position. The on-time performance has slipped. There have been some issues recently with pilots. Delta just announced no cabin service in economy on flights under 349 miles. They've dumbed down the domestic first product. Delta One is stale on board. The Delta One lounges are terrific. Is it time to, I don't know, does Delta need to maybe take off the rose-colored glasses it may be wearing to take a fresh and honest look at itself and say, how do we, what do we need to do to not just stay up to speed, but once again, get tangibly ahead of its key competitors?
Well, I'm not going to talk about where Delta is heading here because I'll let them announce all of the great things that they have coming online here in the next weeks, months, and years and not steal their thunder because, I'm no longer an insider and I don't have the right to go out and make those claims. But I do think that you're going to find a reinvigorated and a very robust push to continuous improvement on the product itself. And I think you're going to be very excited when you see some of the things that are coming in the not too distant future.
Good.
So, Glenn, do alliances remain necessary given the number of airlines that have joint ventures these days, and in Delta's case, equity investments?
I think, there's a placement for these big global alliances, but it really, in my mind, is more on the technology side and allowing people to actually access each other's networks and do it with some semblance of ease, rather than if you think back to 20 years ago, there was a thought that airlines would contribute their shares to these giant global alliances, and the alliances would actually be the capital pools, and then that never came to bear, right? But that was the genesis. If you think way back, everybody thought that the Continentals and the Northwest of the year they would contribute all the equity to SkyTeam, and SkyTeam would be what you traded in, and that would be the executive overriding all decisions. And nothing could have been further from the truth, right? So that didn't play out. And then the question was, well, what do they offer? And I think, clearly when they're done well, they offer utility to customers that you wouldn't otherwise have. But that's the limit of them because they don't really create value in and of themselves, right? Is that the joint ventures and the equity partnerships, that's what creates the value. And so, they'll continue to morph, but I think they're more focused on, the technology that brings all these carriers together so that you can sell a ticket to Timbuktu rather than that these are going to be parent companies that own all the global airlines.
On that, Glenn, there's been some discussion about should foreign investment rules in U.S. airlines change. This is something that came up last week on a panel I moderated with Doug Parker, Doug Steenland, and Monty Brewer. I just read a J.P. Morgan report that Castle Lake has proposed buying EasyJet. Castle Lake is a U.S.-based firm. Do you think that it would make sense for the government to rethink what foreign investment should be allowed in U.S. airlines? Not necessarily control, but at least investment?
Yeah, I think as long as it's not controlled, you could look at it. But I do think that having the U.S. airlines under U.S. control is quite important, and something that we should continue to enforce.
All right. So you were at Delta for a very, very, very long time, and I have to believe that your phone rang constantly with executive recruiters reaching out to you about leadership roles at other airlines. Why did you choose to stay at Delta? I think there's a lesson in here for people, regardless of where they are in their careers, about loyalty to a company.
Well, I think it's loyalty to the people you work with, right? It's the loyalty. And for me, not having any children and just having dogs, Delta was my other baby, right? Is that this is something that I worked hard with a team to help build and was very proud of it. And then the question is, well, are you going to trade your child for somebody else's child? And not being a parent, I can't imagine that anybody would ever do that. And I felt a loyalty to the project that I was on. And I'll go back to when I was leaving my post at Alitalia and I was looking for another job in the airline industry. Jerry Grinstein, who was the CEO at the time at Delta, and a wonderful man. I think he's now 94 and kicking and doing so great. So shout out to Jerry there. But, I said I wanted to work on putting Delta back to its rightful place at the top of the airline industry. And so that was 20 some odd years ago. I wrote that, and I felt like that was the project I'd been working on for so many years. And I think as I looked at things, as I aged and started looking more at what was next in my life, I thought, wow, it's time to do something else, right? Because I do think that we accomplished that of putting Delta back at the top of the aviation industry. When I was a kid, I was the travel agent for our family, and we had family in Florida. And I still remember the Delta phone number, 1-800-221-1212. And and I knew I had Eastern. The choices were Eastern or Delta, really, were the two choices. And if I could get Delta for a similar price, my family would be like, you get extra dessert today because you won the prize of getting Delta, which was always perceived as the better carrier. And then there was a period of time where it wasn't perceived as the better carrier. And, you call those the dark days of Delta, where, the only thing that mattered was cost. And then reinventing it to be back at the top of the aviation industry was really, I got a huge sense of accomplishment out of that. And I don't think that I could replicate that. So why would I leave?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I have to tell you, I think you appreciate it. When I started covering airlines, one of the early things I did was have breakfast with David Bonderman, who at the time was controlling owner of both Continental and America West. And those were the dark days for Delta. But what Bonderman said to me, and it was off the record at the time, but I think it's okay now. He said, all you need to know is this is a commodity business, and in a commodity business, you're only as smart as your dumbest competitor, which is usually Delta.
Wow.
We used to, Greg Brenneman, another great leader at Continental from way back when, he called them, and I think you published it, that Delta management was a box of rocks.
Yes. Yeah, yes.
And we actually had a little box of rocks on the conference table that represented Delta's management.
Well, certainly changed all that. All right, we have a lot of young people listening who are early in their careers. Any advice for someone starting out in the business, or maybe advice for mid-career people looking to have greater impact?
Yeah, I think my advice is see as much of it as you can, because I think if I had just grown up in the finance division, or if I had just grown up in the tech ops division, or just grown up in the catering division, I wouldn't have seen how it all comes together. And I think, I know a lot of other companies do these things where, if you're in Home Depot, for example, I know you have to go run a store for a period of time. And I think getting a varied experience so that you can make judgments for yourself as opposed to rely on other people to make judgments for you is something that is invaluable in creating a career in the aviation space. It is a complex business and it's ever changing, but fundamentally, it's how you serve the customer, and it's fundamentally delivered in pretty much the same way it has been for the last 30 or 40 years. And so understanding how that all works together will be really an invaluable thing as you think of how you change it to improve it.
Awesome.
Glenn, I've got two questions for you. One builds on what you just said. Do you think airlines like Delta should have something like People Express did for their new employees? Should airlines explore the viability of having new employees spend time at an airport, spend time as a flight attendant, and so on, and rotating throughout whatever those jobs would be, so that they, at least at the beginning of the career, they do get an understanding of the different parts of the operation.
Yeah, I think I know Delta is moving along these lines. I would encourage other carriers to do the same. As you can't do that for everybody, but you really ought to figure out for those people who you think will be running the company in 20 years from now, how do you get them more exposure to a more varied interactions, especially with the customer, right? Is that understanding the customer and really focusing the next wave not on airlines, but on hospitality, I think is going to be, that's going to define the winners in this business, are people who focus on hospitality, not transactions.
So, Glenn, what's ahead for you? I mean, what's next, aside from, of course, serving on the board of directors at WestJet?
I think nobody knows in their own life. I think one of the reasons that I knew it was time to retire is that I thought I wanted to understand myself a little bit better, because you get so buried in these jobs that they begin to define who you are as a person. And when that happens and you reach a certain age, you've got to think, gosh, it's like starting over again. It's like, one of those transformational pieces of your life where you're either getting out of school and entering the workforce, or, retirement is probably just the same, if not more daunting. So it's been a really fun experience so far, and I've kept myself very busy. I was talking to Scott before we started today about how busy my life is right now. But, I'll see what comes my way. I'm sure, Scott, who changed careers many years back, I don't think he could foresee that he'd be doing this today. But
No.
I don't know. I'll see what's around the corner, and it's a very exciting part of my life, because there's lots of things to do, and it's now selecting what's going to interest you and what's going to make you feel fulfilled.
Well, maybe you'll feel fulfilled by visiting Scott and me in Dallas. How about that?
I would love to see you. The relationships you have in this business are so fantastic. And, like Scott was saying earlier, is 21 years ago, we were having dinner in Rome together. Henry, we've known each other since the 80s.
Right.
So, I think you also realize how valuable all these relationships are to you and how much you cherish them. So I would love that opportunity.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Glenn, this has been fascinating. It's been terrific. Maybe part of your future also includes podcasting. So we'll do it again on Airlines Confidential.
All right.
Really appreciate all of this and wish you great luck and great happiness in all that's ahead for you. I think you have a lot more to contribute, so it'll be really fun to watch. But thank you.
Scott, thank you. Henry, thank you so much. And I hope I see you guys in person very shortly.
Absolutely. And we will be right back with more on Airlines Confidential.
Promotional support provided by the Ultimate AvGeek website, theairchive.net. A vast collection of airline memorabilia, timetables, route maps, rare cabin and airport photos, special flights, and more. All at theairchive.net, the hub of air transport history.
Thanks again to Glenn. What a terrific discussion. Before we get to a very full mailbag, let's take a moment to thank Cirium for its support of Airlines Confidential. Cirium offers the most accurate and precise data and analytics to enable airlines to optimize planning, operations, and passenger services. The right intelligence drives operational efficiencies, enables you to predict market shifts, and helps airlines respond quickly to maximize revenue, manage costs, and seize commercial opportunity. Visit Cirium.com for more. And thanks to Ontario International Airport, which just launched the ONT BOLD program, a proposed vision to transform the airport's facilities to streamline the passenger journey while also creating jobs, growing the regional economy, and building on ONT's legacy as a global gateway. The program includes plans for a new terminal, a multi-story parking garage, upgrades to existing terminals, enhanced roadways, and new utilities. The ONT BOLD program is early in the planning phase. Visit flyontario.com/bold to learn more and join the journey to ONT's boldest chapter yet. Okay, let's pick a few items out of the mailbag, Henry.
Yeah. So, Scott, there were some more comments on your interview with FAA Administrator Bryan Bedford. First, Jim from Oceanside, California says, quote, pleasantly surprised by the interview. The guy seems to be completely qualified for his job, which is not something I'm used to seeing nowadays. I hope he succeeds. Andy from Cincinnati offered this, quote, your podcasts are a real gem. Thank you, Andy. And this week with Bryan Bedford was a masterclass I will share with our entire software as a service team at GE Aerospace. Your questions were well researched and Bryan's leadership really came out. Thank you, unquote. And this from Tim in Richmond, Virginia. Quote, Scott, I hate Trump. Insert politics into show comment. But I found your interview with Bryan Bedford to be unbelievably revealing. He came across as intelligent, detail-oriented, and execution-focused. I do not pretend to know all of the political side. However, he gave me confidence, perhaps uniquely in this administration, that he knew the details of the job, had a strategy for addressing those issues, including those you and your other guests have raised, and was executing ahead of what I thought a possible timeline was for action. Again, I'm no expert, but I found the whole interview to be one of your best. Nice work, unquote.
Thank you all for that. Really appreciate it. As I said last week, I'm hopeful Bryan Bedford can make a lot of progress on equipment modernization, on controller staffing, and on airspace management. He's bringing a corporate approach to running the FAA, and that doesn't always work in government. He's trying to speed up the pace of change, and that can be tough. He has a relatively short window for success, and that's a challenge. And he needs more money, and that should be the easiest hurdle to remove. This is national economic security we're talking about with air traffic control, and it's critically important safety. This should be a huge priority for Congress as well as the administration. Henry, I saw recently the Pentagon got $9 billion for Dell servers, easy peasy, and yet FAA funding has been held back for far too long. Let's make sure Bedford has what he needs to succeed. Okay, Henry, now that you are a Texan, here's a Texas question. Sean in Bath, Ontario, Canada says, quote, I'm not super familiar with Texas geography, but my last trip to Texas Hill Country started me thinking about seemingly redundant airport locations as we drove past San Antonio Airport. I thought to myself, why didn't they locate this just a bit further north, and then San Antonio and Austin could have a shared airport? Granted, it would be a bit more out of the way for San Antonio residents, even a bit more so for Austin residents, but wouldn't it make more economic sense to have one airport? It certainly works for the Metroplex, that's Dallas-Fort Worth. Yes, I know, Sean says, I know Dallas and Fort Worth also have Love Field and Alliance Airport, which the Perot's developed, but DFW dominates. There are probably more areas in the U.S. where consolidation would make sense. Sean also says, I think I know at least part of the answer, local politics. And as they say, all politics is local, but it might be an interesting show topic. Love your podcast, by the way. Thanks, Sean. So what do you think, Texan?
Well, howdy, Sean. In Texas, you're legally required to say howdy now. So, Sean raises a very good point. And again, my mom was from Dallas. I've been going to Dallas since I was literally a baby. And so I'm very, very familiar with the battles between Dallas and Fort Worth over a shared airport. I've read the history of it, and it took decades, but a shared airport between the two cities finally happened. But the geographic distance between Dallas and Fort Worth is a lot closer than that between Austin and San Antonio.
Yeah.
And, as Sean said, all politics is local. Well, remember what we talked about a few minutes ago when we were discussing Southwest and ego? If you think business people have egos, city leaders and cities themselves have egos, right?
Yeah.
And they manifest themselves, those egos manifest themselves in very, very interesting ways. Airports are one. Now, again, San Antonio was, until relatively recently, the larger city of the two. Austin was a state capital. And I'm not saying this or intending to say this in a disrespectful or insulting way, but it was a sleepier market than San Antonio, which had more tourism, it had more business than Austin did until the tech boom hit Austin, and then the city really exploded. And so now, there is a discussion underway. There are, I think, thoughtful debates and discussions being held about, could a shared regional airport be practical? But again, where do you put that airport? How far away from the city centers would it be located? Is there a place that is literally in between the two that could be acquired and at a reasonable price? What about the environmental review and everything else? And would airlines want to do this? Developing a new shared airport in some ways might help airlines be much more efficient, right? Instead of having to schedule aircraft into two cities and paying fees at two airports, it would be one. But would the cities let go of their local airports, which help identify them? So I don't know. I think that a consolidated shared regional airport could make sense. You're talking about a distance of 80 miles. That's not chump change in terms of a drive. It is a long drive from either city to an airport 40 or more miles away. In 1971, the airport proposed a joint regional airport. Austinites overwhelmingly rejected it at the time. They didn't want to drive I-35, the interstate highway, halfway to San Antonio. And I can't blame them.
Yeah.
But now Austin is the faster growing city. Austin is getting more of the airlines' attention. More of their flights are going there. They're getting long haul service to Europe and elsewhere. And so San Antonio, I think, is saying, how do we get what they're getting? And I think maybe they are saying perhaps the best solution is a shared airport. If they do it, I will just say this. I hope they think about rapid rail transit or something that will help people get to the airports faster and reduce road congestion, because driving 40 or more miles is no fun.
No, and driving on Interstate 35 is no fun no matter where you are.
I'm driving on I-35 just within Dallas. I'm scared.
Yeah. I'm actually in Austin as we record this, and as I was driving into the city, the road sign was flashing. If I took one way, I could save 40 minutes on the drive to San Antonio over staying on I-35, and I thought, wow, 40-minute difference if I take the bypass or whatever. It just reinforced, yes, they're 80 miles apart, but the drive can be even longer than that. Austin's building a new terminal. The airport's booming. When Southwest talks about long haul service, it's interesting because I think, Southwest has designs to be the number one airline or remain the number one airline in Austin. And to do that, it's going to have to provide long haul service because people in Austin don't want to go just to Dallas and LA. They want to go further. So I think there's a lot of investment going into the Austin airport. I love the idea more of some kind of high-speed rail link where people in San Antonio could get better access to the Austin airport.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, on that note, that's all we have for this week. Thanks to you, Henry. Thanks to Glen Hauenstein. Terrific discussion. I really appreciate all that you contribute and all that Glen has contributed, not just to the podcast, but to air travel in general.
Well, thank you, Scott. Again, my thanks to Glen for his participation in the interview. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you, as always, for listening. And on behalf of Airlines Confidential, we hope that you'll be back next week.
And happy anniversary to Allie and Brandon, our parents. Love, Sophia, Miller, and Juliette.
This podcast is produced by Mass Media. Info@massmedia.net.